With Adrien Hower and Tyrone Taylor set to play big roles in the 2024 Mets, how crucial was that trade that David Stearns made this offseason? We'll break it all down on today's show.
You are Locked On Mets, your daily New York Mets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello to all you amazing Mets fans. You're watching Locked On Mets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Ryan Finkelstein. If you want to find any of my work, follow me on X at Finkelstein Ryan. You can also find some of my writing at justbaseball.com, where I work as the managing editor. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. New customers who join today will get $150 in bonus bets if your first bet of $5 or more wins. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. Now, the New York Mets made a lot of moves this offseason, but I can make an argument that the best one that David Stearns made was the trade he swung with the Milwaukee Brewers to acquire Adrien Hower and Tyrone Taylor. And the reason I think that's the best move is cost of acquisition and role these guys are going to have for the Mets this season. To get these guys, it was essentially a salary dump for the Brewers. Adrien Hower in his final year of arbitration was going to make over $5 million. For a small market team like Milwaukee, they were ready to get out of that salary. Tyrone Taylor was hitting arbitration, starting to make some money. Well, if a fourth outfielder's on the minimum, fine. Once they're going to make $1 million, get him out of town. So David Stearns swoops in. He uses that relationship he had with Milwaukee. He gets a deal where he gives up Coleman Crow, a pitching prospect that, for all we know, could amount to something in Milwaukee, but he's coming off Tommy John. That's not really a guy that has a ton of value. And you get two functional pieces on your roster. I think they're going to play a pretty massive role. We're going to start with Adrien Hower, who did make his Mets debut in the Grapefruit League on Tuesday. Tyrone Taylor was playing center field and batting leadoff in that same lineup. But Hower had a really good first outing, pitched 2 innings, got 4 ground balls. One of them was a double play that erased the one hit that he gave up. 2 perfect innings, a strikeout. That's what you want in spring training for a veteran. And that's what Hower is here. Okay, his career has spanned all the way back to 2011. That's when he was drafted by the Houston Astros in the second round. The reason that I bring that up is David Stearns has been familiar with Adrien Hower for a very long time because Stearns went into the Astros organization as an assistant GM in 2012. So he is very involved with everything going on, of course, throughout his career. But when he was with the Astros, I'm sure he was on top of their minor league system and watched Hower come up. Then he ends up inheriting him in Milwaukee because in his final season with the Astros and Brewers swung a trade where Carlos Gomez and Mike Fiers went from Milwaukee to Houston in exchange for a package that included Adrien Hower and Josh Hader, a brutal trade for the Astros that has come full circle in a lot of ways this offseason. First of all, because Hader is now an Astro. Also, now Hower is a Met. The Stearns connection, there's a lot of different ways that trade can be revisited right now. You also have the fact that Mike Fiers was the whistleblower on the sign stealing scandal in Houston. So what a trade that was. And that trade might not have ever happened if the New York Mets completed the deal that they had with the Brewers to get Carlos Gomez back in a Mets uniform. And of course, as you all remember, they didn't like something in his medical that would have sent Zach Wheeler and Wilmer Flores to the Brewers. Instead, the Mets get Yoenis Cespedes. The rest is history. But it's just funny that Hower, in a weird way, has been linked to the Mets since then. And then, again, ends up in Milwaukee. Stearns comes a couple months after when he takes the job as the GM. And again, he is watching his development. Now, Hower made his debut in 2015, but it was just a cup of coffee as a September call-up. Then, due to ineffectiveness and injury, didn't make it back up to the big leagues until 2018, pitched a little over 13 innings, had a good run there, but really his first full season was 2019. That year, he pitched to a 3.72 ERA in 111 and a third innings pitched. 2020 had a rough year during the COVID season, ERA over 5. 2021 settles back in, has a career year, a 3.22 ERA, and that was in 142 and a third innings pitched. Now, in 2019 and 2021, what you see that's similar from both seasons is a ground ball rate that was almost at 60%. It was in the high 50s, like 59% each year. The last couple seasons, that ground ball rate has dipped below 50%, and his ERA has ballooned because of it. In 2022, he had a 4.73 ERA and 102 and 2/3 innings pitched. 2023, a 4.12 ERA and 111 in a third innings pitched. Now, while the ball has been in the air a little bit more, he has kept it in the yard. Even last year, I think his home run per nine was 0.76. That's off the top of my head because I didn't mark that in my notes, but I did mark that his career home run per nine is under 1. So if you're giving up less than a home run per every 9 innings you pitch, you're doing a good job not giving up the long ball. So that's one thing that he has to his benefit. If he gets the ground balls up a little bit more, well, you're going to see a better version of Adrien Hower this season. That's for sure. Because when the ball's in the air, okay, he's giving up line drives. That could be hits into the gap. That could be obviously line drives that or blue pits that fall past the infield into the outfield. That's where he's going to get dinged up a little bit. And there's always the question for a single baller, is he able to pound the strike zone, because he doesn't necessarily have the pitch to strike guys out or to get swing and miss. So if you're falling behind a lot, that's where you can run into some trouble as well. But what I look at with Adrien Hower is a guy that throughout his entire career has a ERA of 4 flat, who has thrown over 500 innings in the big leagues. He's a veteran. He's comfortable in the National League. He's very familiar with both David Stearns and Jeremy Hefner. A lot of talk today about that throughout his, not throughout his start, but after his start, where he was doing media first with the, in-game broadcasters, then after, about how him and Jeremy Hefner go all the way back to 2011 when he started his professional career. He worked out with Hefner because they're both Oklahoma guys. And so they've kept in touch for all these years. That's a really good working relationship. And ultimately, I look at Adrien Hower, who's at 31 years old. He talked about, working with a special coach this offseason to improve his flexibility, pliability, all that stuff. This is his year to put up a big season. And I don't think that Adrien Hower is going to be an all-star. I'm not that delusional. But I do believe this is the perfect situation for Adrien Hower. He's on a team that should have a really good defense behind him, and we'll talk about that a little bit more in the next segment as we get into Tyrone Taylor. He's with an executive he's familiar with in David Stearns. He is with a pitching coach that he knows very well. And he also is at a point in his career, I think he's figured some things out. While, the numbers the last 2 years haven't been as good as his first 2 years in the big leagues, or his first 2 full seasons, I should say, in 2019 and 2021. That's also the league adjusting to a synchro ball. And he actually talked to Gary Cohen, Ron Darling during the broadcast about how he learned something from playing the Mets last year, because he gave up, I think he said back-to-back home runs or 2 home runs in the game to Nimmo and Beatty. And what he identified as lefties were sort of keying in on that sinker down and away. That's what he wants to do. And so he started to figure out, maybe I go backdoor with my slider a bit to steal some strikes on those lefties, and then throw that sinker front hip on the left-handed batters where it kind of freezes them and he can get strikes on the inside, or they just don't know which way to really key in on him the way they were previously, just expecting, all right, he's going to try that sinker down and in, and then they can go out and get it and lift it. Instead, he's now keeping him guessing a little bit more, and that's just an adjustment that a veteran pitcher starts to make, figuring out how the league is viewing you so you can counteract it. And so I really do think that he's in a really solid spot to have a nice season for the Mets. And if you're talking about even a back-end starter that's giving you 120-plus innings, where he's going to keep his ERA in the low 4s, if not potentially in the high 3s or maybe even mid 3s, I think there's a chance he really outperforms expectations, has a nice season, and really provides a ton of value on this 1-year deal essentially with the Mets. The projections have him at a 4.45 ERA, essentially, anywhere between a 4.45 and a 4.66. But I think there was like 3 different projection models that had him at a 4.45, between 120 and 130 innings pitched. So based on how hard he gets hit, the lack of strikeouts, all that stuff that factors into the projections, they have him at like a 4.5 ERA guy. But I also think if you are a sinker ball pitcher that gets the ball on the ground, that keeps the ball in the yard, and has a good defense behind you, The expected ERA this year might be a 4.7. But as we've talked about already on this show recently, the actual ERA I think might be a lot better for Adrien Hower. Obviously, part of that is good luck and fortune throughout the season. But I think Hower, McGill, these guys have a chance to outperform just based on the defense that the Mets are going to have behind them. And a big part of that is Tyrone Taylor, who we're going to talk about next year. Having this guy to be your fourth outfielder is, I think, one of the more underrated aspects of the team that David Stearns has built this offseason. I want to get into that a little bit in the next segment. First, though, today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Get buckets with your first bet on FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. Because right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bets. $150 if your bet wins. You could bet on all your favorite NBA players and teams with quick bets, live same-game parlays, exclusive props, and more. Yesterday on the show, I talked about MLB futures. Did a whole show on it. You can go back, listen to it. Broke down all of the important odds pertaining to the Mets, like their odds to win the World Series at plus 5,000, their odds to win the National League and make it to the World Series at plus 2,100, their odds to make the playoffs at plus 1,200, or if you want to bet on someone like Pete Alonso or Francisco Lindor to win the MVP, you can find those odds at FanDuel as well. And remember, when you're there, make sure before you place that MLB futures bet, you put a $5 bet on an NBA game or something like that, where you can win that $150 in bonus bets guaranteed if your first bet comes up a winner. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and shoot your shot. FanDuel, official sportsbook partner of the NBA. A little over a week ago, I did a podcast breaking down the Mets outfield and how in 2022, their outfield was fantastic when it came to production, from Mark Canha, Starling Marte, Brandon Nimmo. How last year, Canha fell off, Starling Marte fell off an absolute cliff, and the outfield was nowhere near as good. And then I discussed this upcoming season, how I believe Starling Marte can bounce back, how Nimmo is going to continue to be a consistent force, but also how Harrison Bader and Tyrone Taylor could really help this team in a lot of ways. And I think it's an underrated aspect of what David Stearns put together. The fact that he acquired Tyrone Taylor to give the Mets a really good defensive outfielder, someone who could profile as a fourth outfielder for this team. And then he looked at DJ Stewart potentially being the other starter, said, nope, I don't like that outfield defense. Let's go get Harrison Bader. And so now what you're looking at is 4 outfielders come opening day who can play solid defense. Starling Marte is the biggest liability going into this season defensively. And if Marte is healthy, he should be at least close to league average out there, and his arm is always a weapon. Now, what Taylor brings you is another really good arm, a guy that can play center field as well. So now, as much as we can talk about Brandon Nimmo's improvements defensively in center, I think he's a left fielder moving forward. And we're going to see that throughout the year, where there's no reason to put Nimmo out in center field unless Harrison Bader gets hurt, in which case, yes, you can slide him into center. But when Bader needs a day, you put Taylor out there. And I think Nimmo can get comfortable in left, and his defense can play up in left. But Taylor gives you like I said, a very strong arm. When it comes to arm strength, he ranked in the 85th percentile last year. When it comes to arm value, so accuracy of throws, 81st percentile. He's also in the 86th percentile in sprint speed. So a very athletic guy that can certainly handle right. And throughout his entire career up to this point, he has yet to make an error in the big leagues. Now, we'll knock on wood real quick, because by saying that, and by virtue of him now being on the Mets, he probably will make at least an error this year. But it shows you a guy that when he gets to the baseball in the outfield, he's probably not going to drop it. And having an outfield alignment where you can throw Bader in center, one of the best defensive center fielders in baseball, Nimmo in left, who I think is going to play up out there, and Taylor in right, that is going to help this pitching staff immensely. So when you have Tyler McGill out there, or Adrien Hower, and guys are shooting balls into the gaps, guess what? You have great outfielders making plays, preventing runs in a different manner. I think there's a reason why the Mets haven't flinched when they lost Kodai Senga for the first month of the season. Could even stretch into the first 2 months. Because I believe this front office looks at the roster they have put together and says, you know what we can do? We can see who's throwing the ball well. I'm sure there's going to be some days where Starling Marte is out there instead of Tyrone Taylor. There's probably going to be a lot of them. But if you have a starting pitcher you think is going to give up a lot of fly balls, throw out that, plus defensive outfield and watch them save a bunch of runs for you. I think that's how the Mets are going to win. And the thing about it too is outfield defense can be a little bit contagious. It can swing momentum. Who can forget that catch by Brandon Nimmo, which in some ways feels like the signature moment that helped keep him in a Mets uniform and get him that 8-year contract, where he robbed that home run for Jacob deGrom against the Dodgers. The way Citi Field erupted. Great defense is fun to watch. And look, if it's great defense on a 500 team or a sub 500 team, yeah, who's going to care? But I do think that the Mets can steal some games. And if they are a good team this year, the way they're going to be winning is a lot of fun. Great defense doesn't sell tickets early in the season, but it certainly can win you a lot of baseball games. So when it comes to the bat, at least he's not a net nothing out there. At least he's not a guy that's just going to be an easy out, because in his last 3 years where he's been playing, pretty consistently with the Brewers, he's hit at least 10 home runs this season. So there is power there. Doesn't strike out too much. His strikeout rate for his career is 23.1%. Anything over 25 is where you're looking at a guy that's a real liability when it comes to the strikeouts. The fact that he's under 25%, it shows he's going to at least put the ball in play enough. He doesn't walk enough, though. He only walks 5.5% of the time, which has led to really low on-base percentages throughout his career. Doesn't hit for that high of an average. His slug of 451 is great. But also you look at his isolated power, and by product of a good slug and a low batting average, his ISO actually pops a little more than maybe it should. I was kind of diving into this for the show today. You look at his isolated power, it puts him in the same conversation around guys like Christian Walker, Manny Machado, Julio Rodriguez, and Freddie Freeman. But the reason why those guys have similar isolated powers is because they hit for a higher average, because ISO is slugging percentage minus average. So Tyrone Taylor over the last 3 years has an ISO 1 point better than Freddie Freeman, but Freddie Freeman's hit like 319. So that's the difference. Freddie has slugged better than Taylor has. It's just a different way that they go about their slug. It's all power for Taylor. Freddie gets some slug from just hitting for a really high average. Regardless, again, he's not nothing at the plate. He's going to hit some home runs, and there's going to be games where Tyrone Taylor is going to hit that 3-run homer and make the 2 great catches, and he's going to be the MVP of the game, and you're going to absolutely put one in the win column because you had him starting in center or right. To pick up that guy for basically nothing on top of a pitcher that's going to be in your starting rotation probably this entire season, it's a masterclass of a trade from David Stearns, who now has the ability to swing deals like this where he can use money in his favor instead of be crippled by a lack of resources. And I'm excited to see the other trades like this the Mets can continue to make over the coming years. And I would be interested to see if the Mets actually swing some more deals moving forward with the Brewers, because I think that's a relationship that David Stearns can keep coming back to. And I want to talk about how that could manifest itself this year at the trade deadline. So we'll get to that in just a minute. First, though, today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Game Time is the fast and easy way to buy tickets for all the sports, music, comedy, and theater events near you. Personally, I live in South Florida. I'm going to try to make my way out to Port St. Lucie one of these days to catch a spring training game. The place I'll go to get tickets is Game Time, because it's the place that you can find the best last-minute tickets. I'm going to pull the app up right now. I'm looking at tomorrow, as you listen to this today, Mets at Astros. Tickets as low as $21. And you can kind of go down the line. And the further away the event is, the higher the tickets are right now. But as you get closer, those prices drop. On Friday, you can see Mets at Cardinals, for as low as $18. So you go to Game Time. It's the only ticket app that gives you complete peace of mind with your purchase. You can see the view of your seat before you buy, so you know exactly what to expect when you arrive. There's all-in prices, so you'll see the total up front. You know that you're going to get a great deal before you check out. Buy tickets in seconds with 2 taps. That's it. You're all set. Game Time has deals on tickets right up to the start of the event, even an hour after it starts. So it's the place you can go, like I said, for last-minute seats. And you can take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time by downloading the Game Time app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. Terms do apply. Again, Create an account, redeem the code Locked On for $20 off. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Download Game Time today. If you're an everyday listener of the show, make sure you become a Locked On Mets insider for all of your coverage on the New York Mets this season. This is our texting service where I send you updates anytime some news breaks on the Mets. We'll be sending out the lineup every day when the season starts, so you get the starting nine sent directly to your phone through a text message, so you can ask me questions anytime. And it's also we're going to be running our signed giveaways throughout the season. So if you want to be a part of all this bonus Locked On Mets coverage, find the link in the episode description or go to subtext.com/Locked On Mets. Now, as I alluded to in the last segment, I think this relationship between David Stearns and the Milwaukee Brewers is only going to continue. While there might be hard feelings with Mark Attanasio, the owner of the Brewers, there might be some pettiness there. We don't know. I wonder if David Stearns wanted to be the president of baseball operations for the Mets last year, and they made him sit out, and he had to be an advisor for the Brewers for one more season. I don't know how all that broke down behind the scenes. You could say there might be some conversations that might have taken place that aren't supposed to have taken place. Who knows? As far as what's out publicly, David Stearns first spoke with the Mets in August when he was allowed to discuss contracts with new teams, and he ended up, coming aboard and running the show here. But while, again, there might have been, something that happened there between Stearns and ownership, as far as whether there was even a conversation broached about letting him out of the contract, what did happen is Stearns stayed on as an advisor, and he continued to help out Matt Arnold, who is now running the show in Milwaukee, a guy who worked at David Stearns' hip for years, his right-hand man. And I don't think there's any hard feelings whatsoever between Matt Arnold and David Stearns. I'm sure this guy's had a great working relationship. And why would I think that? Well, the first thing that David Stearns did when he became the Mets president of baseball operations, when it came to making a trade, was call up his old buddy Matt Arnold, and they swung a deal. I think these two teams will be trading a lot. I think David Stearns, or I know David Stearns, has intimate knowledge about how that organization is run because he built the infrastructure. So he's going to know the prospects that would be attracted to them. He's going to know their mindset on a lot of things. He's going to be able to identify, I bet you clearing Hauser and Taylor from that roster is going to be very beneficial to Matt Arnold and that front office as they try to work through their constraints to build out a roster that can try to compete in the upcoming season, but stay relevant for years to come. So I turn your attention to the trade deadline. What could happen between these two teams? The Brewers are in the mix. Hey, they're probably going to hold pat for the most part. The one player that's still left on an expiring contract that might get moved regardless of how competitive or not this Brewers team is Willy Adames. He's the one guy. Rhys Hoskins to a certain extent, but I'd imagine that if the Brewers are relevant this year, Hoskins would have a big part of it. Not to say that Adames wouldn't have a big part of it, but they just made a trade, sending Corbin Burns to the Orioles, and they got Joey Ortiz in that deal. He forecasts to probably be their starting shortstop for years to come. This season, he might play third base with Adames at short, but in the long run, they already got their next shortstop. So not to say the Mets are going to get Adames, but he's the guy that I would say, even if they were competitive, they might move. But let's say they aren't competitive. Chicago Cubs just got Bellinger back. The Reds are an up-and-coming team. Even the Pirates have something to say this year. They got a decent team on the rise. I'm not saying they're going to be great, but are they going to be a 100-loss team? I don't think so. That division can be really competitive. Oh, yeah, I haven't even mentioned the team that always reigns over that division, except for last year, the St. Louis Cardinals, who definitely should be a lot better after signing Sonny Gray to headline that rotation, Lance Lynn and Kyle Gibson, giving them a little bit more, innings eaters and depth of that rotation. And then just the steady progression. You see a guy like Jordan Walker, who looks massive in camp right now, could have a huge season in his second full year in the big leagues. The Cardinals should be really good. So there is a world where the Brewers aren't having the best season, and it's time to pivot. Look at their team, and you can find a lot of guys that could help the Mets come trade deadline. Let's say the Mets are in the mix. They're sitting in the second wild card spot. They got a 2-game cushion, but they need help in that rotation. And they want to make a trade, and they want to get a guy with control. Devin Williams would still have 2.5 years of control. Excuse me, Freddie Peralta would still have 2.5 years of control. We'll get to Devin Williams in a second. Freddie Peralta could be a great number 2 to Kodai Senga, and a guy that would be cheap because Stearns signed him to a great contract when he was in Milwaukee. He could be cheap for the next couple of years. You could get Peralta, and yes, you'd have to give to get, but the Mets have the prospects to be able to swing a deal like that. And they would probably have a better chance swinging that trade than trading for Dylan Cease. I don't know how Cease is going to pitch this year and how Peralta is going to pitch, but I only say a better chance because, again, with David Stearns' information on the Brewers, what they might need in the organization, which prospects they valued, he was there a year ago. And you got to understand, front offices don't just scout their own team or scout teams when they make a trade. They're scouting everybody. Okay? Knowledge is power in the game. And trust me, if you are a winning team in a market like Milwaukee for a long time, you got knowledge across the board. So that's a trade I look at that, we've talked about happening throughout this offseason, never actually did, but one that I could say, all right, like maybe that's a move that could happen. I did an entire show that I encourage you to go back and watch or listen to, where I broke down Christian Yelich as a potential trade fit for the Mets. And I talked about being able to get a pitcher in that deal. Well, let's just say the Brewers are having a bad season, but Yelich is good again, and the Mets need to get a bat and they want to get an arm. They could lessen the prospect capital to give up to get a Freddie Peralta for their rotation, or if they need a guy to help set up Edwin Diaz in that bullpen, a Devin Williams, and they can use money on their side here, take Yelich on, and all of a sudden you can really boost your roster at the deadline. So really keep an eye on Milwaukee. I already mentioned Hoskins. That's another one. Let's say Mark Vientos just isn't hitting this year. The Mets haven't found an answer at DH. Hoskins is. You could always swing that deal. Adames, same thing, different position. Let's just say you wanted to bring in a stopgap at third base. All right. So I just, as we talk about the one big trade the Mets made this offseason, or most people might not like me referring to it as a big trade, but a impactful trade that the Mets have already made with Milwaukee. There could be a blockbuster coming this year at the deadline. If the Mets are in it and the Brewers are not, and they will have pieces to sell, watch out. That's all I'll say. But before we close, of course, our daily Grapefruit League update. Going to go some rapid fire notes here with what happened on Tuesday. I already mentioned Adrien Hower. Tyrone Taylor did get a hit, drove in a run, sneaked a ground ball up the middle. That did, score one. I don't think I mentioned his Grapefruit League stats through my notes. Let me scroll back up here. I missed that one because, can't believe I did. Grapefruit League so important. He has played well. A couple games so far is 3 for 6 with 2 runs scored, a stolen base, but I wouldn't take too much from those numbers. Anyway, getting back to what happened on Tuesday, like I said, Hower looked really good. Nate Lavender coming out of the bullpen, another perfect inning with a strikeout. He's making a case, okay? I'm excited to see how many opportunities they give him, and if he could be a dark horse to make this team. It's really a fun pitcher to watch, the way he uses hesitation in his delivery, calling for the left side with that fastball that just should not play as well as it does, but he's got a good fastball at 92. Yeah, I like to see Lavender have another great outing. Jorge Lopez, not as much. He gave up a home run, but that was really the only damage. He did walk a batter too, but other than that, limited to just 1 run allowed. When it comes to the hitting side of things, Rylan Bannon had a moonshot of a foul ball, crushed one, yanked it though, pulled it past the foul pole. Then he hit a double. So a little bit of power shown there. I talked about Bannon and others who are signed to a minor league deal in a full episode, 2 weeks ago now. But Bannon was the guy that I did sort of highlight as one that I thought had a chance to provide some impact this year because he can play third base. So just an interesting guy to follow. Jose Iglesias made some really nice plays at shortstop. We'll see if he hits. Probably not at this stage of his career, but a good depth piece to have in Syracuse. Mark Vientos went 0 for 3. Not a good day for him. Drew Gilbert had a really nice at bat. Sort of got buckled on a left-on-left curveball, but hung in there and fisted it over the third base back to drive in too. So really nice at bat for him. Gilbert, it's a lot of fun to see him play in these games, to see Acuna play, Jet Williams, the top 3 prospects in this system. It's awesome to see them get this much action. Speaking of top prospects, Alex Ramirez having a good spring. He doubled in this game. Don't imagine he has any chance to make this team, but seeing some improvements offensively is huge. It was kind of a lost year for him last season when it came to his work with the bat, but he spent this offseason at the Mets complex in the Dominican Republic trying to work on his game. So hopefully, as I imagine, spends this year in Double-A, I don't know if they're going to make him repeat High A for a third time. He finished 2022 there and then spent all of last year in High A Brooklyn. I imagine they want to change the scenery and also move him up. I mean, you're going to be on the 40-man roster in High A. I doubt it. So we'll see what Alex Ramirez can do in Double-A this season. I'm starting to like him a little bit more just watching how he looks comfortable in the box in these games. It's spring training, but the glove gives him a high enough floor. If he can get that bat, close to a league average, once he eventually makes his debut, he will have value to the Mets for a good amount of time. I think more as a fourth outfielder, but you never know. Other than that, I don't have any more notes here. Oh, G-Man Choi homer. Hit the ball really hard and homered. So that's going to be all when it comes to today's show and our Grapefruit League coverage. We'll continue to go through some notes at the end of each show. But for the rest of the week here, we're going to be looking at the Mets top 10 prospects. I got my list made. So we're going to go through that over the final 2 shows of the week. I'll break down some just missed of the top 10 and the back 5. And then on Friday's show, we'll get into my top 5 prospects in the system. So make sure you're checking those shows out. If you're listening on the audio side, follow, rate, and review wherever you get your podcast. If you are watching on YouTube, hit that subscribe button. We're trying to make that push to 8,000 subs by opening day. We're getting really close. So appreciate all of you who have subscribed. Follow me on X at Finkelstein Ryan. Follow the show at Locked On Mets. Thank you for making Locked On Mets your first listen or your first watch every day. Now for your second watch, head over to YouTube. Check out the first ever 24/7 streaming channel covering everything in the world of sports. Of course, I'm talking about Locked On Sports Today with our local experts from each team and our league-wide experts from each league. You find Locked On Sports Today streaming 24/7 on YouTube.